I wanted to use this opportunity to kind of talk about a couple of Christmas customs. And one of the things that we realize every year when we have Christmas is that our society, we go all out for Christmas, and there's all different ways that people signify what Christmas means and what it looks like and everything else. And one of the things that's important and it's helpful is just to take a pause and realize that everything that we have that's kind of a custom for Christmas, other than maybe Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer, but other than that, it comes out of the Christian family, it comes out of the Christian tradition. And so I wanted to kind of point to a few of those highlights. Now, the first, of course, the one I wanted to really focus on at the beginning is Santa Claus. So we're going to take a look at who Santa Claus is. So let's take a look at the next slide there. Okay, Santa Claus, of course, comes out of the tradition for St. Nicholas. Now, St. Nicholas we're not Roman Catholic, and we're not Greek Orthodox. We're not Orthodox, so we don't have emphasis on the classical traditional saints. And so, but one of the things that we recognize is that the saints are a big deal for a big chunk of Christians around the world. And St. Nicholas, other than Mary herself, St. Nicholas is the saint that is portrayed and spoken of most often. Isn't that interesting? I mean, you got a lot of other, really big saints, like St. Paul, St. Peter, like St. Joseph and all that. But St. Nicholas is the one that gets the most emphasis. And St. Nicholas was well, you know what? I'm not going to tell you. Let's just watch this video. Let's do a click for the video. The brief explanation of St. Nicholas. So St. Nicholas, Myra in Turkey is this is where the first Christians came, because Christianity was finally not outlawed. It was allowed by the Roman Empire in the 300s, and St. Nicholas is one of the first great Christian leaders. His parents were older when they had him, and so the thing is that what happened is they died of the plague, and so he's a young man. And his dad was pretty wealthy, so he inherited all their money. So what the video is talking about is that what Nicholas did was that he would help out people in his town. And in those days, a woman had to, when she got married, she had to have money to give to her husband's family. Okay, so that's how it was. It's called a dowry. You guys know about dowries, right? Okay. So the only problem is that if the family was really poor and they didn't have a dowry, then she's not going to be able to get married. And if she's not married, a young woman in those days, back in the 300s, she gets to be a servant girl for the rest of her life or a prostitute. So two jobs that he probably didn't want. So Nicholas, what he did was he took money, his inheritance, and he split it up in gold, and he had these sacks, like these round sacks, and this has been passed down. So we've seen ancient art with these in him, and then he threw them through the window. He didn't come down through a chimney, but he threw them through the window, and they landed, by the fireplace. And one of the traditions is that this poor family had their socks by the fireplace to dry them, and then the second night, he threw it and it landed in the sock. So. Isn't that interesting? This is like from 300s, this story. Then the third day, the ladies, these three ladies, their daughters, their dads stayed up at night to see who was throwing stuff through the window. And sure enough, he did it again, and he caught Nicholas. And Nicholas said, "Don't tell anybody." And obviously, he must have, because we're still talking about it today. So there's so many fascinating things about Nicholas. I mean, they had his bones were stolen, like they said, from his grave and brought to Italy in 1200s. But what's really interesting is some of the bones were left, and just lately they've done DNA reports on those bones, and those bones are actually the same bones as the ones that are in his grave. So we have total scientific proof that Nicholas not only existed, but that this story is true, because it's the same exact bones in Myra as are in Italy. I guess the last thing I'd say just about St. Nicholas is He's like I said, he's a patron saint of so many, so many different groups. A patron saint just means a saint who's specially focused on and emphasized. In the Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition, people will actually pray to the saint. It's kind of like, looking in the heavens and saying, "Hey, Nicholas, put in a good word for me." So they'll pray to the saint. Well, in the Lutheran, in our family, we don't pray to saints. We pray directly to Jesus. But if you've ever thought like your mom and dad, like my mom and dad are in the heavenly dimension, and you might still kind of say, "Hey, Mom, put in a good word for me," that type of thing. So they pray to the saints. But so St. Nicholas he's got, like the lady was saying in the video, he's got sailors and merchants. But the one that's really the most bizarre, and if you live in Vegas, you'll see this a lot because they have a ton of pawn shops. I just said that because I see Rob's dad's here. But anyway, if you live in Vegas, when you go to the pawn shops, a lot of times, did you ever wonder why there was 3 round bags hanging in front of the pawn shop? Next time you go to a pawn shop, when you're down on your luck. No, just see that when you drive by. Pawn shops have those 3 bags. Those 3 bags signify St. Nicholas. I mean, how strange is that? So anyway, he's been around for a long time. All right? So I wanted to take a look at, right here, here's a picture. This is where St. Nicholas, he kind of evolved into Father Christmas in the English-speaking world. This is from the 1600s, and there's Father Christmas. It's starting to look kind of like, Santa Claus, isn't it? Right? There's Father Christmas, but then there's people at the door there with swords. Well, there's people there to kill Father Christmas. Because in England in the 1600s, they had a revolution where the Protestants revolted against the Catholics, and then the Protestant Oliver Cromwell, he's the Protestant leader, and this guy must have had hemorrhoids or something, because he was always so mad about everything, and he was a spoil sport. So he just said, "No more Christmas." So he threw as well as everything else that was fun. No more Christmas. So they weren't allowed to celebrate Christmas. And so this lithograph or whatever it is right here is literally, this is a Protestant propaganda piece where they're going to come in and kill Santa. Come on, what's up with you? But this custom stayed. It changed. England changed. And then another revolution, and now England is cool again with Christmas. But in the United States, remember, this is exactly the same period when the Puritans came over and all that. And what happened is that they wouldn't celebrate Christmas in the United States. If you're coming from England, or English speaking, they wouldn't celebrate it. And that was pretty tough, because they started celebrating it in England again, but not in the United States. They kept the custom of no Christmas, no celebration. Next slide. That was until the author, Washington Irving, he's the best-selling author in the world at the time. How many of you have heard of Washington Irving? Okay, most of you, good, see? Good schooling. Most of you are my age who just raised your hands. Okay, good schooling. Okay, Washington Irving. So in his sketches book, like he had Legend of Sleepy Hollow and all that, well, he had stories about Christmas, and he loved Christmas because he went to England to visit, and he saw how much they were celebrating Christmas. This is an illustration from his book, his original book. This essay is called Old Christmas, and you see all these people feasting and all that. Well, because he was so popular, he came back to the United States. He was so popular that people said, wait a minute, maybe Christmas is okay. And sure enough, some people started celebrating Christmas. Now, next slide. Just a few years later, there was a church leader who was visiting his cousin, and she had kids, and so he wanted to entertain these children, and so he wrote a poem for Christmas, and then they illustrated it, and of course the poem is "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Now, who was this guy? His name was Clement Moore. Now, this is 1822. So with this poem, Christmas really started going again in the United States. And just an interesting sidelight, this pastor who wrote this poem, it became so popular, his dad was the bishop at the time in the United States, meaning the head guy in the Episcopal Church. Well, Who was the first president of the United States that was inaugurated? Right? George Washington. It wasn't a trick question. George Washington. Clement Moore, the guy who wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," his dad was the guy who designed the whole inauguration, because he figured, the pastor knows how to do a service and all that, and rituals, and he's the one who inaugurated George Washington. I mean, how interesting is that? So Clement Moore, notice Santa's outfit. Santa Claus wasn't wearing red, even though the bishops, like the Bishop of Myra, St. Nicholas, is shown wearing red because the bishop wears red on special occasions. But Clement Moore has Santa with yellow. Santa changes in the middle of the 1800s in the United States with a famous cartoonist who would do propaganda cartoons in favor of the Union during the Civil War and all that. But then his cartoons started becoming even better loved because the literary magazines in the United States at the time would have his cartoons. And here's his cartoon for St. Nicholas. Go ahead, Mike. Oh, no, okay, go next one, and then we'll go back to that. There you go. So that was his cartoon for St. Nicholas. Now it starts looking more like our Santa, right? Okay, so let's just back up, Mike. There was still holdouts to no Christmas. You know why they didn't like Christmas? Because people were drinking all the time in the United States. Everybody's drinking. So that's why they didn't like Christmas, because they would get drunk and they'd get in fights. I mean, that's actually the truth. I mean, not that you get in fights if you're drunk, but they were drinking too much. But then, so there were still holdouts about Christmas, but then here's what happens. The United States, I mean, we come out of England, that's kind of our mother country or whatever, and there was still a lot of honor given towards England, and a lot of people looking to England, in terms of fashion and everything else. Well, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, they put a Christmas tree in their home for the first time, actual Christmas tree. Because they still didn't want to do something, because there were still the Protestants and the Catholics and the trees, and they didn't want to, create any problems or make waves. And so they hadn't had a Christmas tree in their home. But they did in 1843. And there it is. And so when they saw that in the United States, they said, boom, we're having Christmas. So we've had Christmas ever since in big celebrations. Okay, next slide. After NAST. Okay, by the time we get to the 20th century, this is the Santa Claus we all know and love growing up. And that's the Santa Claus of Coca-Cola. It always has to end up being that, doesn't it? And this is the Santa who we think about the most. And the whole idea with the Santa Claus was that he's connected to Christmas then. And then as Santa these ads would change, a lot of customs change. For instance, there's Santa going to war. This is my favorite one, because in World War II, General Motors was making a lot of the weapon systems and all that, and they had a campaign, and it was called the Inland Way campaign for General Motors. And so they have all these posters and propaganda posters for things, but this is my favorite one. Santa Claus has gone to war. Okay? And there's others like that. I mean, I found another one. This would be like going down the rabbit hole once you see one of these posters. But there's another poster with Santa smoking a Camel cigarette. And it says, "It doesn't scratch your throat." But I don't want to show that one. Okay. But anyway, so this is where we got this custom for Santa Claus. All right, so now let me go back. Next slide. Next one. There we go. Okay, it's the 1500s. Martin Luther brings, a reformation, basically a revolution, a big change in the Roman Catholic Church and the church worldwide. And one of the things that happens is, because Martin Luther is so well known, a lot of our Christmas customs come from Martin Luther himself. Okay, this is really, really interesting. Okay, so first of all, priests weren't allowed to be married. Okay, so they weren't married, they didn't have kids. So you're not going to have kind of like a traditional family Christmas being lifted up as something that's really important and all that in the church, and they didn't. There wasn't even any sense of a Christian family. They had no concept of what is a Christian family, because the only person who's teaching about the Bible were the priests. Well, the priests don't know what the family was. I mean, they might have come out of one, but the point was that when Luther got married and started having a lot of kids, the customs of his home became the custom for the whole Christian church. Okay? When Luther was a dad, a husband and a dad, and had kids, he got perturbed because at that time in Germany, they were celebrating Christmas, but they were celebrating it on St. Nicholas Day, which would be December 6th. So in Germany, the custom was the kids would put their shoes out on December 5th, and then St. Nicholas would come and fill their shoes with candy and toys. Well, Luther got perturbed. Luther gets perturbed a lot. He got perturbed and he said, I'm not celebrating St. Nicholas. We're celebrating Jesus. And so we're going to make Christmas Eve be when we get presents. And so he switched the date from St. Nicholas Day, December 6th, to Christmas Eve for the exchange of presents, for kids to get their presents. Isn't that interesting? It was Luther who did that. Then, next slide. Then when Luther was, he's got a house full of kids, and so his thing was, parents, you teach your kids. He said, moms and dads, you're the bishop of your own house. All right? So you're the spiritual head of your household, mothers and fathers. And so you're the ones that teach them. So he used illustrations, things, in order to teach his kids about Christmas and about Jesus. Well, guess what he used? He used nativity scenes. Well, nobody was using nativity scenes. I'm not saying he invented the nativity scene, but he made it popular. Okay? So he made the nativity scene, and it had Jesus in the manger, and then he would tell his children about, this is the greatest gift. Out of the whole world, God comes down as a baby, and he comes as a human being. He gives up his godness, his divinity, in order to spend time with us and to teach us about what it means to be human and what it means to be someone who worships God. And so that's the manger scene. But then the really interesting one to me, this is my favorite one, is the Christmas tree. Martin Luther invented the Christmas tree. Okay, seriously. So here's what happened. Other people had maybe garlands or lights or whatever, but he was the first one to bring a tree in the house and put lights in it for Christmas. Now, this is the Christmas Eve at the Luther house. All right, so you got Martin Luther, you got Katie, his wife, you got his kids, and then you got a couple of guys, older guys. Those are professors from the local college where he taught. So Luther would take boarders in, like students, in his home. So he always had an extended family of Christians in his home. But he also would have the professors come over, and they would sit down and they drink beer and they talk about the Lord and talk about the Bible and all that kind of stuff. So there's a couple of his professors. He's playing the guitar, because Luther played the guitar. It was called a lute in those days, but it's a guitar basically. And Luther is singing songs for Christmas with his kids. Well, what about the tree? Well, he was coming home at night, and of course the sky was filled with stars. They didn't have light pollution like we have, so we don't see a lot of stars. So he's coming home and he sees all these stars and he thinks how beautiful they are, and they're shining through the pine trees by his house. And so he sees these lights glimmering and he says, Katie, I gotta get look at those lights. We've got to get a tree. And so he went outside and he chopped down a tree and he brought it into the house, and then he wired candles on the tree, and that's where we get our first Christmas tree. And so a lot of other people started doing the same thing because Luther was doing that. And he liked to bring the Christmas tree to show the light of the world. And then he would have them sing. Well, they would sing songs, Christmas songs, and Luther himself, he would write many of them. Now, the only reason we don't sing Luther's most famous Christmas song is because it has 16 verses. Okay? Someday we're going to sing that song, but not yet. But it was a beautiful, that what he would do in his songs is he would talk about, he would spread the gospel through the singing, and he would write the songs for the people. In fact, Luther said, we got to start writing hymns. And he called them vernacular psalms, meaning songs you write using the popular music of the day that people can understand and sing. So he invented singing Christmas carols. Prior to that, they had songs about Christmas, but only the monks, the monk choir would sing them, and they didn't become popular for home usage. They wouldn't sing them at home. Luther said, we got to start having songs being sung by the whole church, and then people could sing them at home. And so he invented when we're singing songs here, this is why, because Martin Luther started it. And so and Luther said, the best hymns are carols. And so that's why Christmas carols, to this day, if I would ask anyone, what's a hymn? They say, well, it might be something you sing, somebody might think it's something you sing in church. Okay, what are the most popular hymns? Well, they'll say Amazing Grace maybe, and then they'll stop there. And then you say, well, a carol is a hymn. Oh, yeah, okay, Joy to the World, So the carols have always been the most popular hymns. And so Luther brought this whole singing in church, singing the Christmas carols, he brought that whole thing into being. So since this is a Lutheran church, I just kind of like giving us some props today, So if anybody asks you anything, you just say, it's like in my big fat Greek wedding when that guy had Windex, remember? And anything that happened, or the Greeks invented this, the Greeks did this. You could do that with Luther too. All right, next slide. Next one. Yeah. Okay, please stand. We're going to confess our faith. Words in the Apostles' Creed.